The air on the Giza plateau in July doesn't move. It presses. 120 degrees of it, dense and dry, sitting on your skin like a second layer of clothing that holds your heat in. The sun is a physical weight on the back of your neck, and the horizon shimmers, not with beauty but with distortion, the way heat bends the world into something unreliable. There is no shade here, no breeze, no whirring machine pushing cold air through vents. There is only the sun, the stone, and the sound of your own breathing. And yet, 3,000 years ago, entire cities and villages breathed this same air. They built homes here, raised children here, cooked meals, and slept and worked here, generation after generation, in a place that would send a modern person to the emergency room in a matter of hours. And here is the question that nobody seems to ask. They didn't just survive. They thrived. They built the most enduring civilization of the ancient world in a furnace that we, with all our technology, can barely endure for a single afternoon. How? You felt it yourself, haven't you? Stepping out of an air-conditioned car into that wall of heat, the way your body physically recoils, the instant prickle of sweat, the irrational panic that rises when there's no escape. That primal alarm is real. It's the body's oldest warning system. And the ancient Egyptians silenced that alarm every single day in a land that punishes exposure with a merciless indifference. The answer, when you peel it back, will change how you see them. It will also change how you see yourself. Because the story of how they cooled their cities is not a story about ancient genius that has nothing to do with us. It's a story about a species that once understood its environment at a depth we have completely forgotten. And the first layer of that story is so simple, so ordinary, that it almost feels like cheating. Start with the basics. Shade first, always. But not just any shade, deliberate, engineered shade, built with an understanding of where the sun rises and falls at different times of year. The Egyptians didn't build random structures facing random directions. They knew the sun's path the way a sailor knows the tides. Houses were oriented to catch the prevailing wind, the one that comes off the water and carries a hint of coolness, while their thickest walls face the worst of the afternoon sun. Then there's the water. You know how a wet shirt feels cool on your skin in a breeze? How the evaporation pulls heat away. That's not a modern discovery. That's physics, and they understood it long before anyone gave it that name. They hung woven mats over their windows, wet them down, and let the dry desert wind blow through the damp fibers. The water evaporates, and the air that enters the room drops in temperature. It's a primitive form of air conditioning, and the only energy source it needs is the sun itself, pulling water into vapor. But here's where it gets interesting. That wet mat trick, as clever as it is just the surface, just the first shrug of a system that runs much deeper. Because when you look at how an entire Egyptian household stayed cool, not just comfortable for an hour, but livable through the brutal summer months, you start to realize that this wasn't a collection of happy accidents. It was a technology. Stop and think about that for a second. When we hear the word technology, we think of silicon and electricity and screens. But technology is just applied knowledge. It's the ability to shape the world to your will using what you understand about how it works. And by that definition, the ancient Egyptians had some of the most sophisticated technology ever devised. They just built it out of mud and wind and water instead of steel and current. When you realize that a wet mat and a mud wall are not just tricks, but a full-blown technology, it changes the way you think about progress. This channel is built on exactly those kinds of shifts. Subscribe so you can keep walking alongside these hidden blueprints of the ancient world. In the comments, tell me, before this moment, what did the word technology make you see? Steel and screens, or did your mind already go somewhere older? The heart of their system is a simple architectural feature that barely registers in most history books. The Malkoff, or Windcatcher, picture a house with a small tower on its roof, open on one side, angled to face the prevailing wind. When the breeze blows, it gets caught by that opening and forced downward into a shaft that channels it into the rooms below. No fans, no motors, just the pressure of moving air doing the work. The result is a constant flow of ventilation, even in the stillest, hottest hours. And it doesn't just bring new air in, it pushes the stale, heated air out through other openings, creating a circulation that keeps the interior from becoming an oven. It's the kind of design that looks almost too simple to work until you build it and feel the difference. And the Windcatcher is just the beginning. Walk into one of these homes and you feel the temperature change even before you understand why. The walls are made of thick mud brick, not because the Egyptians didn't know how to build with stone, but because mud brick is a better material for this purpose. Stone absorbs heat and radiates it back at night, turning the room into a storage heater. Mud brick, in contrast, absorbs heat slowly through the day and releases it slowly after sunset. Its thermal mass used as a buffer. The floors are the same. Cool, packed earth, shaded from the sun by walls and overhangs, stays cool long after the air above it has become unbearable. If you've ever walked barefoot on a tiled floor in a shaded courtyard on a hot day, you know this feeling. That coolness isn't magic. It's the earth holding onto the night's chill, and the Egyptians built their entire homes around tapping into it. There's a pause in the narrative here, a calm pocket. Let it sit. By midday, when the sun is at its peak, and even the wind is too hot to be a comfort, the household shifts. The rooms used during the cool morning hours are abandoned. Everyone gathers in the central courtyard, not the small open space we might imagine, but a cleverly designed microclimate. High walls keep it in shadow for most of the day. A pool of water sits in the center, its surface still, slowly evaporating and drawing heat from the surrounding air. Potted plants add moisture and life. This courtyard is the heart of the Egyptian home, and it does something remarkable. It creates a pocket of livable climate in the middle of a furnace. The air there is a few degrees cooler, a few percentage points more humid, and that difference is the difference between endurance and comfort. It's not air conditioning, but it's not suffering either. It's the result of 100 small choices, each one based on a working knowledge of the physics of heat. Now let's pull back from the individual home and look at the neighborhood, because the Egyptians didn't just cool their houses. They cooled their streets. The alleyways between the tall, windowless walls of the houses are narrow and winding, deliberately angled to keep the sun out for most of the day. The walls themselves are tall and thick, and they throw shade across the passages below. By the time the afternoon sun hits its peak, these streets are cool canyons, shielded from the radiation that makes modern open boulevards uninhabitable. The whole city, in a sense, is designed as a single, interconnected cooling system. Every building, every street, every courtyard contributes to an overall climate that is significantly more tolerable than the surrounding desert. It's a system that works at every scale, from a single window mat to the layout of an entire metropolis. And at night, the system shifts again. The sun sets and the desert releases its heat quickly. But the buildings, the stone, the accumulated warmth of the day keep radiating. So the Egyptians move. They climb to their flat rooftops and sleep under the open sky, where the temperature drops to something close to pleasant. The rooftop is not a luxury, it's the coolest place to be, and whole families sleep there through the summer months, the night breeze pulling the day's exhaustion from their bodies. It sounds idyllic, doesn't it? Falling asleep under a sea of stars, with the night wind moving across your skin. And it was, in many ways. But it was also a practical solution to a physical problem. The night air was the only true relief available, and they learned to take full advantage of every minute of it. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about this system. It was so effective that it survived for thousands of years, not just in Egypt, but across the entire hot, dry belt of the world, from the Middle East to North Africa to the Indus Valley. The same core principles, the same design gestures, repeated again and again in cultures that never spoke to each other. Because the physics are universal, and once you understand them, you don't need to reinvent them. You just build. You just build. Generation after generation, passing the knowledge down in the very shape of the walls and the angle of the streets. Nobody needed a manual. The city itself was the lesson, written in mud and shadow, and the feel of cool stone underfoot. That city taught its people how to be cool without a single moving part. Subscribe if you want to continue uncovering the quiet genius in ancient design that we've nearly forgotten. And if you can still feel the relief of that rooftop breeze just from the story, type cool stone in the comments, because that's the physical truth we're about to complicate. But now, let me show you where this story turns towards something stranger, because here is the contradiction that should stop you cold. We have more cooling technology in a single modern home than an entire Egyptian city possessed. We have compressors and refrigerants and thermostats that hold a room at precisely 72 degrees, whether the sun is blazing or the world is frozen. And we use all of it, constantly, profligately, as if cool air were an unlimited resource that falls from the sky. And yet, for all that power, we have lost something they never had to give up. Look at the modern answer to heat. It is to seal the world out entirely. We build glass towers that turn sunlight into a greenhouse effect, then burn vast amounts of energy to undo the damage we just created. We sit in rooms that are cold enough to need a sweater, while the street outside becomes hotter than the desert that once hosted the most advanced civilization on Earth. We have become experts at fighting the environment, and we have completely forgotten how to cooperate with it. Stop and think about that for a second. Not the efficiency of their system, but the philosophy behind it. They built with the sun, the wind, the earth, the water. They treated the environment as a partner with its own rules, and they learned those rules so thoroughly that they could build a city that was cooler on the inside than the desert was on the outside without consuming a single watt of power. Here begins the next layer of the reveal. So far, we have looked at the mechanics. The Malkoff, the mud bricks, the courtyard pool, the rooftop sleep. But there is a deeper truth underneath all of these, and it is the one that we, in our air-conditioned offices, have the hardest time grasping. The Egyptians did not merely cope with heat, they lived with it rhythmically, in a way that shaped every hour of their day. We tend to think of heat as an enemy to be defeated, a constant condition to be neutralized. But the Egyptian understanding of climate was not static. It was alive, it moved through the day, and they moved with it. The morning hours were for labor, for cooking, for the heavy work of life. The midday was for rest, for the famous siesta, for the darkness of thick-walled rooms. The evening was for community, for gathering in the courtyard as the air finally began to cool. This is the knowledge we have lost. Not the technology, but the rhythm. If you have ever visited a hot country and found yourself exhausted by 2 p.m, while the locals seem perfectly at ease, you have touched the edge of this lost wisdom. They are not tougher than you, genetically. They have simply learned to move with the heat instead of fighting it. The heat is not an interruption to their day. The heat is the day. And here is where the story reaches its most uncomfortable point. We did not just forget how to build windcatchers, we forgot the entire way of being that made them possible. We forgot that a building is not a machine to be controlled, but a shelter to be inhabited. We forgot that comfort is not a constant temperature, but a relationship between your body and the world around it. We forgot that there is a difference between coolness and cold, between relief and isolation. The modern home is a sealed box. In it, we have achieved perfect climate control, and in that perfection, we have removed ourselves from the very rhythms that kept our ancestors sane. We sleep in identical temperatures year-round, never feeling the seasonal shift on our skin. We eat food that no longer changes with the harvest. We exercise in climate-controlled gyms instead of working in the sun. And we wonder why we feel so disconnected. There was a time, not so long ago in the vast scale of human existence, when every human being on Earth lived with the sun the way the Egyptians did, when heat was not an inconvenience to be escaped, but a fundamental fact of existence as ordinary as breathing. And the human body, for all its fragility, was adapted to that reality. It knew how to sweat efficiently, how to slow down at midday, how to find the coolest spot in any landscape, almost by instinct. That instinct is still in us. It hasn't been bred out. It's just been buried. You can feel it if you've ever slept outdoors in summer, how the body relaxes when the air finally drops, how the mind quiets in a way it never does indoors. You can feel it when you step into the shade on a boiling day and a wave of relief passes through you that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with something older. That response is a memory of a time when finding shade was a daily achievement. And the cool shadow of a wall was a gift. Now we come to the furthest reach of this idea. The Egyptians built their civilization in a furnace because they understood something fundamental about the relationship between humans and their environment. They understood that you do not conquer nature. You learn its rules, and then you bend them to your will within those rules. Their architecture was not a triumph over the desert. It was a negotiation with it. A truce that held for thousands of years. There is a word for this kind of knowledge, and it is a word we have almost forgotten. Wisdom. Not information, not data. Wisdom. The kind of knowing that comes from living with something for long enough that you understand its moods, its patterns, its hidden gifts. The Egyptians did not read about the desert in a textbook. They lived in it, generation upon generation, until the knowledge of how to be cool in the heat became as natural to them as breathing. Every mud brick they laid was a lesson learned from a failure. Every courtyard was a refinement of an earlier courtyard that was a few degrees too hot. Every Melkoff was an improvement on a design that had been tried, tested, and found wanting. This is the slow, patient accumulation of knowledge that we, with our instant answers and our climate-controlled boxes, have lost the ability to imagine. And yet it is not lost completely. This knowledge is not just a relic, it is a thread, and you have just watched people pick it up again. If you want to follow that thread wherever it leads, subscribe and walk the forgotten paths with us. Leave a comment with the phrase passive cooling if you would live in a home built like an Egyptian courtyard, because those simple words carry 5,000 years of wisdom. There is a small and growing movement of people scattered across the world who are rediscovering these ancient principles. Architects who study the Melkoff and adapt it to modern buildings. Engineers who design passive cooling systems that need no electricity. Ecologists who point out that the most sustainable building is the one that works with, not against, the local climate. They are not Luddites rejecting technology. They are simply asking a question that the Egyptians answered 5,000 years ago. What if we built for the world we actually live in rather than against it? It is a beautiful question, and it is a deeply human one, because the desire to be cool is not a modern invention. It is as old as consciousness itself. Our ancestors in every hot corner of the planet devised ways to escape the worst of the heat. They dug underground homes in the deserts of China. They built thick stone houses in the Mediterranean that stayed cool through the hottest afternoons. They wove palm frond roofs that let the breeze through while blocking the worst of the sun. They used every material they had in every way they could imagine to create a few precious hours of relief. And they did it all without a single watt of external energy. Let that sink in for a moment, because it is the heart of the entire story. The most enduring civilization of the ancient world, built in one of the harshest climates on Earth, functioned comfortably for thousands of years using only the sun, the wind, the water, and the earth. No coal, no oil, no electricity. No refrigerant chemicals silently leaking into the atmosphere. Just pure, patient understanding of how the world works. You have felt this understanding, even if you have never named it. If you have ever sat in the shade of a tree on a hot day and felt the breeze move across your skin, you have benefited from a design that predates all of human architecture. If you have ever fanned yourself with a magazine or dampened a cloth to cool your neck, you have recreated a technology that is older than written history. The principles have never changed. The physics have never changed. Only our willingness to follow them has changed, and that is the real tragedy of what we have lost. Not the Windcatcher, not the mud brick, not the courtyard pool. Those are just objects. We could rebuild them tomorrow if we chose to. The technology is not lost. The willingness is lost. The willingness to design our lives around the reality of our environment instead of demanding that the environment change to suit us. We have built a civilization that is profoundly powerful and profoundly fragile. We can cool a building to 70 degrees in the middle of a 120-degree desert. But we can only do it by tearing the heat from the air and pushing it somewhere else, and the ground grows hotter, and the city grows hotter, and the energy bills grow higher, and still the planet warms. And somewhere in all that furious effort, we have lost the simplest truth of all. The simplest truth is that coolness was never meant to be a possession. It was a relationship, a dance between your body and the world, and the Egyptians spent centuries perfecting their steps. When you feel the sweat on your skin and the breeze that dries it, you are not experiencing a failure of technology. You are experiencing a conversation that has been running for tens of thousands of years, and the other side is still listening. You are the descendant of that conversation. Every cell in your body carries the memory of nights spent under open skies, of mornings in the cool of a shaded wall, of the precise moment when the heat broke and the world became breathable again. That memory is not a relic. It is a resource waiting for you to remember how to use it. The next time the heat presses down and you feel that old panic rising, step outside the sealed box for a moment. Find the shade, find the breeze. Let your skin do what it was always meant to do. You are not fleeing the world. You are rejoining it, one breath at a time, in a rhythm as old as the sun itself.